You are now listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. This is Paul McGUIRE. On today's program, we're going to continue to delve deeper into the area of disclosure, disclosing the entire panorama of information, not just a one-dimensional shot of disclosure. And by that I mean delving into the area of research, not only into the existence or non-existence of ETs, but the reality of interdimensional beings. And let me just say this, one of the revolutionary discoveries in our time has been the resurfacing of the Book of Enoch, where a lot of powerful truths, and in the Bible, in several places in the Bible, it directly points to the Book of Enoch. In one particular case, the Bible points to the Book of Enoch by name and gives us permission, if you will, to go to the Book of Enoch for truth. So the Book of Enoch can't be relegated as simply an extra book of the Bible and don't read it. Because the Bible itself tells us to read the Book of Enoch, especially regarding the existence of fallen angels who were guilty before God of mating with human women, and because of that sin, they produced hybrid genetic beings that consisted of human female DNA mixed with fallen angel DNA, thus producing an alien human genetic hybrid race, which was forbidden by God. And for that, they were sentenced to judgment, and they have been locked up with chains in a different dimension until the Lord finally judges them once and for all. So this narrative is not a man-made narrative. This narrative flows directly out of the Word of God. The Word of God, beginning in Genesis, ending in the book of Revelation, repeatedly talks about beings of a supernatural nature: fallen angels, Nephilim, Rephaim, giants, angels, demons, fallen angels, demons, and God's angels. So there's a whole spectrum of living entities discussed in the Bible. Now, I want to go to some research which is going to help clarify for us what is happening throughout this entire disclosure debate, if you will. And that is, this comes, by the way, some of this stuff, like Jacques Vallée and many of the other things that I'm going to talk to you about, I've been writing about for 30 years, a long time. Let me read this to you, some of the stuff to you. Okay, we talked about Jacques Vallée and his discussion of interdimensional entities, fairies, demonic spirits, elves. I know it sounds crazy, but people who take psychedelic drugs, they're not prepared for it, and I do not in any way, shape, or form advocate the usage of psychedelic drugs. But they, quote, blow their mind with psychedelic drugs like LSD, DMT, ayahuasca, psilocybin mushrooms, whatever it is. And the next thing they know, they're talking for hours to an elf or a fairy or a demon or some other interdimensional entity. And there are horror stories. It's not all blissful psychedelic states of consciousness. it's important to be up to speed about this. There's a lot of people taking the psychedelic drug DMT. DMT is the very potent and active component in many psychedelics. It's responsible for creating overwhelming hallucinations, hearing voices, and so on and so forth. But people who have smoked DMT or taken DMT by other delivery systems, they can often report of having met or seen or talked to what are referred to as DMT elves or DMT fairies. So it's not like, well, it's similar to what happened during the 1960s and 1970s when college kids and others would experiment with psychedelic drugs. People who are not prepared for it, people who have been the target of being promoted to. For example, there was a psychedelic researcher who's now dead. His name was Terence McKenna. He was supposed to be the intellectual heir to Dr. Timothy Leary, the Harvard LSD professor. So he became, when Leary died, McKenna became the heir to the psychedelic kingdom, if you will. Personally, I'm very suspicious of some of these people. For example, it's well known that Dr. Timothy Leary, the foremost promoter of LSD, was actually working for the CIA. And that's a fact. It's not a matter of conjecture on my part. But Terence McKenna reportedly was also working for the CIA. So many people have suggested that the entire counterculture psychedelic revolution and the usage of drugs like DMT and LSD were all part of a global CIA experiment / operation. Now, I have always been suspicious of Terence McKenna as being an opportunist, as being somebody who would make up stuff, manipulate the facts, hype up stuff. And I think, allegedly, I think that Terence McKenna was not the purveyor of higher consciousness that he and Dr. Timothy Leary pretended to be. That was their stage act, if you will. Far from being psychedelic visionaries, far from being men who were leading people to higher consciousness and a better world. In reality, for me and many others, when we found out the whole truth about these psychedelic adventures, they actually appear in the harsh light of daylight where you can see the truth. They actually appear as kind of psychedelic grifters, going from Burning Man, going to Woodstock, to Burning Man, hanging on with this rock group like the Grateful Dead, and then more recently going back in time still and listening to some of the warnings of people like Kurt Cobain, who actually, before he allegedly killed himself, perhaps he was murdered, Kurt Cobain was warning of a conspiracy, if you will. Here's a rock star warning of a conspiracy behind the so-called psychedelic movements, even though he himself was still enamored by them. And that's why he had the famous underground writer, author, that also was allegedly an intelligence agent, and that is he traveled with Ken Kesey on the psychedelic bus. Ken Kesey was an author of a best-selling book, and Ken Kesey was an experimenter of psychedelic drugs. And there's a common heroic figure, but he's not really a hero, he's more of an anti-hero, that floats through these realities, and Kurt Cobain had him come meet with him up in Oregon, where Cobain lived. So in any case, behind the scenes for many of these so-called heroic figures, because that's the PR, that's the marketing behind them, but they weren't heroic. figures. They were opportunists, and worse than that, they were Pied Pipers. They were psychedelic Pied Pipers, encouraging young people, encouraging millions and millions of young people to take psychedelics, to take DMT, to take LSD, to take ayahuasca, and like the Pied Piper, playing this seductive flute, these men are leading people to destruction because these drugs are potentially very, very dangerous. So, Vallée, a famous UFO researcher, writes and discusses, and his research reveal the similarities between interdimensional entities, which match up to biblical descriptions of angels who are not bound by physical laws, fallen angels, and that deceptive, manipulative aliens align with warring about spiritual deception or fallen angels, and that they masquerade like good guys or angels of light. So Vallée, in his writings, writes about demons, levitation, healing, supernatural healing, out-of-body experiences or astral projection, and what Vallée, a secular, high-level research scientist, Vallée, who is not a Christian by any means, lays out a historical research into the fact that there's a lot of similarity between the biblical texts regarding demons and the modern reports regarding UFO and ET encounters. And in his writings, Jacques Vallée leaves open the possibility that whether this alien intelligence is benevolent or evil or possibly neutral or something far stranger, possibly a spiritual system that is directly acting on humans. Now, there are very heavy-duty scientists that are exploring these possibilities. And what Vallée is alluding to, and you see, if Christians are going to operate their lives and interface with people who are bringing up these subjects in many different highways and byways of culture and society, a Christian's going to be asked about ETs, God, the Bible, and things of that nature. We are going to make a tragic mistake in losing numerous generations if we don't have for them more than adequate, powerful, scientific, logical, rational, as well as biblical arguments and biblical discussions that can deal with the topics of UFOs, aliens, ETs, interdimensional beings, multidimensional beings, etc., etc. We have to walk our talk. We have to be up to speed on these topics. We can't, if we come across as frightened or like we're dodging the questions or we're hiding, we're going to lose future generations. And that's not acceptable, by the way, before God. So one of the theories that Vallée proposes, and he's not the only one proposing the theory, is that this whole ET thing, this whole interdimensional being thing, is some kind, now this is the theory, it's some kind, they believe it's some kind of, quote, control system. It's a control system that is compatible with ideas of spiritual warfare, which is a biblical concept, or non-human intelligence that have interacted with humanity for thousands and thousands of years, reshaping perceptions. Others think possibly that these supernatural experiences are a form of higher consciousness or even a planetary regulatory mechanism affecting mythology and society. We're talking about heavy-duty spiritual concepts, metaphysical concepps, Jungian concepts. Carl Jung and his whole theory of archetypes, and he's not a Christian, I understand that, but his ideas influence thinkers, movers and shakers all over the world. And so if we're going to be effective in communicating, we have to be able to deal with that. And if we don't deal with that properly, we're going to lose the battle. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to lose the battle. This is a battle for the hearts and souls of mankind. And it's critical, absolutely critical, that we don't lose the battle and that we win the battle for the hearts and souls of mankind. That's what it's about. That's where we are. We're in the last days time period. Okay, so on this edition of the Paul McGUIRE Report, I simply want to reiterate, this is where advanced science, these are the realms, intellectual realms, and multiple dimensions that advanced cutting-edge science is delving into in today's world. People are challenging every precept, every philosophical and spiritual system. And so as we continue on the Paul McGUIRE Report, we're going to talk about Vallée's belief in interdimensional entities that are related to non-human intelligence operating across multiple realities. And then, if that's not intense enough, Vallée and other scientists keep ratcheting it up into higher levels of discussion where we're talking about biological extraterrestrials and the continuity that seems to exist with past and even historic cultures that had to deal with this stuff, like who created the pyramids, who moved the pyramids, etc., etc. And Vallée talks about how past cultures had to deal with things like angels, demons, fairies, and all the other stuff. You know, a lot of people think that all this talk of fairies and elves and stuff like that is it's the stuff of children's books. But it's not. It's what those ancient cultures, they actually had to deal with these things. Now, these things largely disappeared when mankind entered the post-supernatural age and everything became mechanical, logical, rational, and it squeezed out the other stuff. So we're going to investigate it, because in this investigation we will find a truth that will set us free. This is where the world is moving with lightning speed. We need to understand it. Why? So we can shape it, so that we can be forerunners and visionaries. God bless you. This is Paul McGUIRE. Visit paulmcguire.us.